All right. Good morning. It is Thursday, April 1st, 9:04 a.m. And we're still chuckling over April 1st jokes here. So this is a meeting of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. And we are following up on an ongoing discussion related to water quality work, which has been something we work on every year. Lately, with discussions around CSO events, and we had the federal delegation in part to look into funding to address those at a faster clip. But we know that Act 64, the various TMDLs all over the state, we actually have a long and comprehensive list of water concerns. So we wanted to pause and try to get our bearings and have the commissioner in to talk to us about a broader overview of clean water projects, including stormwater and wastewater, which has been in the news just lately, but we know there's more to the story. And then we're having Steve Klein and Catherine Benham in to help us start to get our arms around all the different funding mechanisms that are going to be available, because it's a complicated year to keep track of. There's various rounds of CARES related funding. I don't know if any. Sometimes we use CARES related money to fulfill another state obligation. It frees up that money and can be applied to a distinctly non-CARES project. So we have a complicated financial landscape to just inventory and then look for opportunities going forward. So with that, I wanted to pause and turn it over to Commissioner Walk. Thank you for coming in and help us start to look at the inventory of projects or the kinds of programs that you have on your list for the coming year and beyond.
Sure, and I apologize, given the timing of this, I don't have that list fully fleshed out, in part because it doesn't exist in an easy form, given the way in which we fund these activities. There are different pieces coming from different places. We're happy to think through that more, but in our conversation, for the record, Peter Walk, DEC Commissioner. In our conversation yesterday, Senator Bray, I thought it would be, you hear a lot about specific topic areas like CSO outfalls that come up at various different points, and it's hard to kind of think about where do those fall in the prioritization of clean water issues. Where does lead service line abatement fall into there are lots of different pieces, and so I think as we've been thinking about it, and it's a little bit complicated right now, just because there's not a lot of guidance yet on what water infrastructure means in the ARPA money and the American Rescue Plan Act money. There is still some there's lack of clarity. We expect guidance coming down from Treasury here before too long that lays out what that really means. And then you've got just announced infrastructure package yesterday that includes even more money for water infrastructure. So there's a lot of opportunity to say what are our priorities as a state, and then how do we align the funding to make sure that we're meeting that need. And so that I appreciate the opportunity to have that conversation. Frankly, we, in a scarce resource environment, we often don't have the opportunity to do that. And so the opportunity to have some investment opportunity gives us the chance to step back and say what those priorities look like. From a rough sketch standpoint, we obviously have the ongoing drinking water and clean water revolving loan funds, which help support our local communities in ensuring they are able to meet the infrastructure needs that they've either developed or will be developing. That is a constant source of challenge, as you know, from a long-term perspective. Many of those projects were built with grant money and are now needing to be rehabbed or refurbished or rebuilt with loan money that is harder for communities to take on in challenging economic times. We have ongoing stormwater work, particularly the 3-acre stormwater permit, which is at this point focused in the Lake Champlain and Memphremagog TMDL areas, but will be spreading out to the rest of the state within the coming decade. And that's a significant challenge, that to retrofit existing impervious surface areas to address stormwater challenges is costly, and it's one area where, as of yet, the state has not decided to have a state match component to that work. And so there's opportunity there, but there's huge costs there too. We also have, stormwater impaired waterways that could use a boost and an investment there. We have communities who are struggling with individual septic systems in a village center that are unable to sort of create that clustered village life that they would like to have for their villages, for lack of enough kind of oomph and cohort to move forward with some sort of community-based system. So there's some opportunities there to provide for those villages to reclaim some of their past glory. That's an issue around the state, and we've done some contract work or some piloting work with the likes of the town of Wolcott and Burke and others, using some Northern Border Regional Commission work. But there's real opportunity there to help make the economic development we want to see in rural areas happen. There are existing challenges with our lead service lines, for example. So the work that we're going to be doing down in Bennington is meaningful in that regard. There are other communities with that challenge. And then we have emerging issues like PFAS, where we should be thinking about how do we invest in pre-treatment opportunities for before it gets to the wastewater treatment plant, so that we're not then dealing with issues on the back end of effluent and PFAS in biosolids. The list goes on and on. There are opportunities to make investments within people's homes to make their water and wastewater infrastructure, their sort of personal and water and wastewater infrastructure, safer, healthier, and more efficient. The list is long. I think we could take the $1 billion plus that we're getting from in ARPA money and spend it 10 times over. So we need to think about, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation about sort of what are the things that bubble up to the top. And one of the things that, Senator Bray, you asked me that was a really good question was, how do we prioritize? Are we talking about, if we're talking about TMDL implementation, is it, should we be looking for the most effective pounds of phosphorus reduced, or should we be thinking about those pounds that are hardest to get? Because we took an all-in approach with the TMDL, and it means that some sectors are harder, the work is harder and more costly than others. And so, those are the sort of the balancing pieces that matter. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity.
Well, thank you. I'm sure that we can all probably come up with another thing for the list. I was thinking of our environmental contingency fund is on a glide path to, I think, being short of money. I also checked with Senator Benning this morning just since we were talking about what was the balance on the revolving loan fund. So I would need to get straight how many, think of us as having more than one, right? There's a one that's oriented to drinking water, isn't there? And then there's another that's oriented to wastewater treatment facilities. I don't know if there's another one a separate one for stormwater. But
so
I think you saw
the Clean Water State Revolving Fund encompasses wastewater and stormwater activities as well. It's primarily been geared around wastewater over time, but there are different components that are eligible. Yeah.
Okay. And he was citing a fund balance of $11 million, which my past recollection when Senator Rogers was on the committee and also serving on institutions, he would give us an update. And I thought the balance was closer to 70. Like they always had ample money to lend. And the challenge was finding enough people willing to finding enough municipalities willing to take on debt, take a bond, float a bond and pull down some money to get a project going. So it'd probably be good to get the revolving loan balance history some, so we know how much flows out of it each year,
Sure.
and what kind of replenishment it needs. Senator McCormick.
Thank you. Since I'm the new Senator Rogers here, shall I do some research on that?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
We're still, thank you for that reminder. Since we're not in the building, I don't see you walking into institutions.
Right. The old boy club of the Senate. Senator Parent is an old boy in training, but otherwise it's the old boy club.
Okay.
I'm happy to dig down the most up-to-date numbers, but Senator Bray, your recollection is closer to my understanding than what Senator Vetting suggested. So I'd like to, between Senator McCormick and I think we can get to the bottom of that one.
Okay, great.
So you'll email me a memo?
Yeah, I'll find the balances and I'll share them with you, and then you can bring them back to the committee if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Good morning, Senator Westman. Just so you'll know where we are, we're talking with Commissioner Walk about a broad overview of all the different kinds of water projects that the committee is interested in and has worked on over the years as we think about CSOs and then where do they fit into that landscape, and then coming back to what you were just leaving off with, Commissioner Walk, the prioritization. So how do you prioritize? What criteria do you apply? So I think in the last 5 years, one of the loudest drivers has been, how are we going to reduce phosphorus? What's the biggest bang for the buck on phosphorus reduction? But I don't know, that serves, that's been great for phosphorus reduction, but I don't know what other criteria we would apply and how they fit into that scheme. I mean, one of them I think would be public health, that which also has a phosphorus play because of cyanobacteria blooms. But that for me means thinking more about a couple of things you mentioned, biosolids from wastewater treatment facilities. And then we have the challenge of leachate from landfills, which so far seems to be, well, let me pause, because the relicensing or the new permit that happened for Coventry required the applicant to do research on options to deal with, I think it was just leachate, right? Like treat it on site, pre-treat it before it leaves. Can you give us just an update of where we are on trying to sort that one out?
Sure. Yes, we did that as part of the permitting of the new cells. Casella did that analysis, and we had a third party review that analysis just because it was technology and approaches that was beyond our normal work, and so we wanted to have another set of eyes. That third party validated the work that Castella's engineered firm did. And they will need a new pre-treatment permit to cover the entire facility and before the new cell opens. And we plan to work with Casella to address how we get to that to treatment in time. There are questions not necessarily about the manner of treatment, but maybe the location of that treatment that need to be resolved. And what partnership opportunities there are with communities and its relationship to the discharge from those communities. And so it's complicated once you get into the details, but Casella has made the commitment to work with us through that process to get to the point where we're getting to treatment.
Okay. So does that basically come down to a choice of treating at the landfill before you ship the leachate, or installing the new pre-treatment infrastructure at a wastewater treatment facility so it could be treated before it goes into the facility?
Or, well, we also had them look at sort of after the sort of to treat all of the discharge from, say, Montpelier or Newport, where they.
Oh, I see.
So as a way to look at different options there. And so we need to work through those pieces and what we like to, not only we want the leachate treated, we also like to see fewer trucks on the road as well. And so we need to sort of ponder how and explore what that looks like. So there will be lots of public engagement and interest in that process. So we will continue to work through those pieces, but that's the path we are heading down towards, is trying to refine that and understand what's the best approach.
Okay. Well, I know I didn't ask you to prepare in detail on that. Just a question is, do you have a rough timeline in mind? Because I know people are concerned about the current program, which has, I guess, correct me if I'm thinking of this too simplistically. Basically, we take the leachate to a wastewater treatment facility, and it, for the most part, is discharged, but in a much more diluted state. I don't know how much.
You're not wrong. Our leachate from not just from Coventry, but the other closed landfills as well, has levels of PFAS in it that have historically gone to wastewater treatment plants to be treated, but that treatment does not remove PFAS. So that to go to the challenge with all of it is, when we did the review of the waste that was going into the landfill to determine what the sources of PFAS were, it was largely consumer products, mattresses, furniture, rugs, clothing, et cetera, that were the source of PFAS into the landfill. So, we got to, it's that classic challenge of where do you cut off the activity? Because it's going to continue to be sources of PFAS long after, even if, say, S20 were to go into effect, there are carpets in all of our houses that probably have PFAS in them, that as that interior design material turns over, will end up in the landfill for decades to come.
Right. It's we've met the enemy, and the enemy is us on this one. It's well, and to that point of, where do you go upstream to stop something happening? Not literally. The one place we do have a relatively sensitive switch is how much on the phosphorus side, to come back around to that, how much phosphorus we import into the state in the form of synthetic fertilizers and grains. Has A&R been engaged at all with Agency of Agriculture I know we do things like cover cropping, but that's more like soil stabilization to reduce erosion and runoff. Is there any ongoing dialogue between A&R and Ag on substitutes or alternatives that would lead to less phosphorus being imported? Because I'm thinking it's probably much cheaper to import less than it is to ever recover more. But that's speculative on my part.
I mean, we have ongoing conversations with the Agency of Ag all the time as to ways to reduce phosphorus. The specific question about whether or not we are in conversations around what practices might provide the opportunity to use less imported phosphorus is there. I know that's an area of research that the UVM extension has been heavily engaged in. I can check in with folks and see where that is.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge that we've faced from a cost perspective is that it's been really nice to think about what could we do on the back end of a digester, say, and pull the phosphorus out of there. And just from a dollars and cents perspective, it's so much cheaper to import it.
Right. Well, it's making me think back to my ag committee days where we would talk about riparian buffers, and there was on the ag side, people would say, well, that 25 or 50 or 100-foot buffer may not seem like a big deal to you, but by the time you stretch that all the way around my property, that's a lot of acreage going out of production. And then there was some uneasiness about, well, does the state pay make payments to take that land out of production? I think that all those that conversation and those practices have probably evolved, but it's just making me revisit the question and think that perhaps those payments, although once they might have seemed pricey, they might be quite cheap compared to trying to extract phosphorus at a digester or an upgrade to a wastewater treatment facility, or all the other things that we do that we'll be picking the lowest hanging fruit. And it would seem like maybe there's an opportunity to look back at that question again. Could be positive bottom line for the farm. People would want to sign up.
Let me have some conversations with the Agency of Ag about that specifically.
Thanks. So committee members, we're covering sort of a broad landscape. I just want to pause and make sure that we haven't talked about either a perspective or criteria to use for a lens to look at the challenge through that you're thinking about that hasn't come up yet. Okay.
Repeat that, please.
I feel like this has been this is a good review.
So
I was saying we've talked about a lot of different areas to do work. And then we've also gotten into a conversation about how would you prioritize, because there's even as much of an increase in money as we may see, the list would still overwhelm that amount of money. So how do we prioritize? And then there's very different criteria that we could be using to prioritize. For instance, if sort of the public health piece is the strongest driver, does that mean more effort on, I don't know, PFAS, heavy metals, pharmaceuticals, biosolids, et cetera, sludge, compared to a more phosphorus-oriented thing where people are worried more about recreation and water? So
I'm confused. What would we do if we were to prioritize? What would you do with that list at this point?
Well, I think good question. I mean, because we're gonna at some point, I would figure we would be working with the agency on what there will be the ability to assemble a list of projects and try to get them quote unquote shovel ready, for instance.
Well, I'm inclined to think that we shouldn't think about them in priority in terms of subject, but what is going to make the biggest impact. In other words, I think if we just say, well, PFAS is our priority, okay, we could put a lot of money into, which could be great. But I think it's each project itself should be looked at with regard to what the impact it is going to have, and if we are going to be able to change. Otherwise, I think we could spin our wheels getting to what the priorities. I think they're all priorities, is my point. I think it's now based on what the project is and how much money we might be able to put toward a particular project.
Right. So I'm agreeing, but I'm also saying if you say the impact, well, then how are you measuring impact? Because that sort of brings us back to evaluation criteria. And I think in other words, I think there'll be competition amongst all the projects. And how would we, how do we engage in a productive conversation with our colleagues at the agency about?
I would say they can bring those to us. I don't see the committee digging into and traveling around the state. I think it's on them to bring with the biggest. Mark, just take a deep breath. I think that is, that's my instinct. I mean, we will hear from them in terms of what they know what we want to do. They know what we're trying to accomplish, I think, on all of this. And if they could bring those projects forward, then we can help navigate that process as a committee.
So this is my one before Senator McDonald. I know he's really excited. I just want a word of caution. I would say the nice thing about this money, and I'm glad that JFO is here to help support this, is that we don't need to have immediately shovel-ready projects. There are 4 years to spend this money. Right. So we have more time than we might have had in the past to have communities kind of bubble up their needs where they may not have considered something because they didn't think it was a possibility.
So can I just ask a question? And I'm sorry I was late. So are you talking about the present era funds, or are you talking about the potential that Congress is working on a infrastructure package, which has been reported to us that looks like more than $1 trillion?
So Senator Westman, that's a great question. What I proposed to this illustrious body was to think about what the sort of programmatic areas you were interested, whether that would be to support the 3-acre stormwater retrofits, whether that would be to address CSOs, whether that would be to make community water and wastewater systems possible at the village and town level, what types of things, because then we can not try to chase money. We can set what our focus areas are, and then make sure that it aligns with the pots that we have.
So here's part of well, first off, I would think that well, let me back up. So we had the representative from Senator Leahy's office in here and saying we don't have stuff shovel ready, and they don't know what to fund. So first off, I would say to you, what would be your recommendation about where we would we could get the best bang for the buck and the way to move ahead quickly? Do you have a recommendation on that? Because I think that it would be important to hear what you thought you could do for work along with that. So I would want you to make a recommendation. And where can we move along the quickest? Not knowing what the feds are going to do with an infrastructure bill. If an infrastructure bill comes first come, first serve, and there's that sort of, we need to get stuff, we need to have a list of stuff ready.
Thank you, Senator Westman. We will bring you, the administration will bring you what we think, how we think these resources should be invested. We're still doing all of the homework necessary to sort through what that should look like. And so this is a bit of a preliminary conversation from a timing perspective. It's a little bit complicated because we're not bringing you anything in particular yet. So it's helpful for me to hear what you've heard in your communities about where the priorities are. We do have a number of projects that are in various stages of acquiring shovel ready. Those are typically the larger drinking water and wastewater projects that take a long time to get to fruition. That doesn't necessarily mean that those are the priorities. We have a long list of 700 or so projects in the Champlain and Magog TMDL areas that are going to need to have retrofits done to meet the 3-acre stormwater permit. We need to do the design work around those first and know what the projects actually are. But that's in terms of impact, that would have a significant impact in terms of our work, in terms of the cost that Vermonters are going to bear. All of those pieces, there are lots of different factors. So that this was, we will bring you that in time. Unfortunately, it's not today.
Here's my concern. My concern if Congress acts and sometime in the summer or early fall, or they have a bill passed, do we have time to wait to, or how do we get a jump on that? So when they come out with an infrastructure bill, we're ready to go.
So when I say we're not ready yet, we're talking series of weeks that will be coming to you, not a series of months. So this is, by, shortly from now, we'll be able to talk about specifics. And I think that we can use those specifics to plus up for in an infrastructure package that may come, or to expand it to different areas. But we're close, because we want to get this. There's a timeline associated with this money, and 4 years for large infrastructure projects is quick in many instances. And so we need to we feel that urgency to get moving as well. So we're still sorting through the categories of what's eligible, and then we'll bring that to you.
So I just say to you, we do have federal era money now. That federal era money could be used to get a jump on these and get to the place where we've done the design work, we've done the stuff to get us ready for that infrastructure. And when you say weeks, today is the first day of April for us. Hopefully 6 weeks from now, we'll be gone. And you probably want us out of town. Don't smile too big. I can see that. But
he doesn't. He does not.
You won't be dragged into committees and away from your real work with that. But the time for us is going to be slipping away. So I just look at this and say, I don't want to miss a huge opportunity that will be, for many of us, maybe a once in a lifetime opportunity to get projects in the pipeline and ready if they do have infrastructure money, because there will be other people out there that want to spend this money.
Senator Westman, you are preaching to the choir. We are ramped up and ready to go. The sad reality is there are details about this money that are not clear yet. And so we're sorting through all those to make sure that we don't come to you with something that we think will be eligible and then won't be. And so getting it right now, taking a little bit of time matters. I am excited about the idea that you think you're going to be out of here by the middle of May. I find that unlikely given the flow of money that's coming in, but we want to work with you to be on that timeline.
I can tell you that the flow of money is not the way it was last year, and we now can pass a budget. So, but I will tell you that what we've heard so far, and I see Steve Klein on here from the Joint Fiscal Committee, is that water and sewer projects are the present era money eligible. And I'd like to find a way to plug some of the ERA funds that is clearly an eligible expense and get our off our duff and moving to have stuff designed. If it's designed, then we can beat the feds up to say, help us.
I agree. I think in some ways that there's an opportunity for the monies in the current sort of ARPA money that's coming, and then the future potential, those could be relatively equal sized pots in some ways from an infrastructure perspective for Vermont. And because we're there are lots of opportunities here. So getting this, I don't see this first round as just being sort of preparatory for the infrastructure bill. I see it as we got to get the whole thing ready, and if we can fund part of it with this money and the next part with the infrastructure money, then let's go. So we're right on board with you.
Great, thank you for more clarity. Senator McDonald, you've been holding your horses for 10 minutes. Do you still have horses?
24 hours on my comments, so.
Okay.
Senator McDonald, please, I'm eager. You are released, please.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
We're talking about getting the best bang for our buck and shovels. The best thing we can do on phosphorus is to stop digging and address the unabated import of phosphorus in both fertilizer and feed, which is a lot less expensive than the infrastructure that is needed to clean up after it. But that was prompted by the vocabulary there.
Okay. Well, and I think Commissioner Walk put that on his list to check in with Ag on.
Yeah, that's
okay. Great. Senator McCormick.
Thanks. I just want to add to re-emphasize Senator Westman's point that our federal delegation was looking for projects that are shovel ready. And I think we need to keep that in mind if there's anxiety about developing a project that may not be eligible. I think that's sort of a gamble we have to take. If we're going to be shovel ready, then we've got to start developing things not entirely sure in advance that they will be eligible. And we all will have wasted his time. If,
I wonder, and I wasn't able to listen into that conversation with the delegation there. I do wonder, it might be worth clarifying that they're going through a sort of earmark development process, sort of the return of earmarks at the federal level, where they really do need that specific project information. But this money is much more kind of soup to nuts, doesn't need to be this project is ready to go right now, from my understanding. Again, we don't have full guidance yet, but so I think they're operating under sort of a different, the federal delegation is operating under a bit of a different pressure, that they can't ask for things as part of the earmark process that aren't ready. And that don't meet an existing line within the federal budget. And so that's my understanding, where there might be a discrepancy there, in terms of the different uses. It's an embarrassment of riches at this point that we have these pots of money to be thinking about how things fit into different ones, but that's the world we're in right now.
Right. Someone with a sharper memory than mine might want to correct me. I thought Senator Leahy himself used the term earmarks. That might have been a reporter in a story about Leahy, but I know I associate.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I remember the folks saying that he likes earmarks, and he's trying to return that ability to the Senate for earmarks. So yeah.
Yep.
So and I know the delegation has been asking pretty much everybody about what their specific project's idea are in the event that earmarks come back. But that's definitely a different ask than we have a gazillion dollars for water infrastructure. Where would we spend it if we had time to do the thoughtful programmatic development, the thoughtful design work, and the project work? What would that look like?
Okay. So we do have JFO for a limited period of time. So I'd like to let's Senator McDonald, you had your hand up.
I was,
Please go
when
ahead.
when it came to water issues, is the money simply available to build and shovel things, or what consideration is given to using it for upland sequestration of carbon and phosphorus and stuff like that?
Okay. Right. And Commissioner's Walk Point, I mean, the delegation did distinguish between sort of block granted money for projects in general, and then the much more detailed projects that, a list of such projects that they could then actually go to bat for in the earmark realm. So
Maybe
it made me wonder if there's a
with,
connection.
Maybe I'll talk with the witness offline and just find out if spending money to avoid, floods and phosphorus.
So Senator, your question is a good one, and one that I think we in the administration and JFO are sort of waiting for guidance on. It's about what water means, because there's a lot of different ways that we could use it that would have impact on our overall water quality, but not necessarily. So we just need.
Okay. Thank you.
And then the last question I have before we turn to JFO is, we were wondering aloud whether or not that sort of block grant money could be used as to bring specific projects to a shovel-ready state. So, can one sort of money do the scoping and preliminary design work that then prepares the specific ones that can then go into the earmark food line? So I don't know if that works or doesn't.
Yeah, I guess from what we understand at this point, that we likely would be able to use the ARPA money for, if it met the overall project met the qualifications for the money, that we could use it for design, engineering, construction, all the way through. And that is the intent behind 4 years, was they didn't want it to drag out forever and they wanted it to be stimulus, but they didn't want to just only go to those projects that we know to be ready, that might have been funded by other money, but we can now not have to use that money. So that's kind of where we stand from my perspective. And so there may be projects that and when one of the open questions, and this is an important one, is can we use this money simply for the design and engineering phase to get it ready for the infrastructure money? That tends to not be well looked upon from a federal money perspective. It needs to be an actual project, ultimately, not the design work. So we need to work through those pieces and
Okay. Well, great. So at least I think we're all very actively thinking about how to solve this puzzle in a timely way. And with that, I'd like to say good morning to Mr. Klein and Ms. Benham. So thanks for joining us. I don't know if we've seen you this year yet, so thanks for coming in. You've heard some of the conversation in the last 10, 15 minutes. What I think the reason we called out to you, and there's a very strange title for your part of the visit. It says, an inventory of monies in support of clean water projects, including stormwater and wastewater. We were trying to cast as broad a net as possible because frankly, we're having a little, the challenge for us is to figure out where are all the funds and what should we be paying attention to? Where are the opportunities? Because there are all these funds. So I'll just leave that really big, squishy question on the table and ask you to take it from there.
Okay, I guess my question is, Catherine could really talk about the capital bill. Should we start with that and just do that quickly, or you want to do, I can go through a bigger picture and come with Catherine later. I don't know what your timing is, Catherine. Do you
I
want
can
to?
do either way, whatever
Okay.
makes.
Well,
Can I,
go
can I
ahead.
just ask, so the first question is that the House took $100 million out and swapped it out.
So let me start with
What
that.
did
And then
they do?
okay, but let me, okay. The thing is, this is a very unique year, and I think Senator Westman's correct. We're probably in a once in a lifetime period right now where we have to think about what's going on. And before I get to that swap out, which is, I'll be there very shortly, there is a lot of money that came out to municipalities. When you talk about clean water, sewer issues like that, you can't forget the 180 million that's gone out to cities and towns. And because a lot of what happens with clean water funding is it goes from the Clean Water Fund to the local governments to sort of do projects in their area. So one thing you want to think about is how can we motivate these local communities to use their money effectively to deal with the same environmental concerns you have, because they're bound by exactly the same rules and regs that we are. So what the House did, and just to, I'm skipping a lot of stuff, I can come back to it if you want to, is they recognized in the ARPA bill, everything in the ARPA bill, the bill just came out, and we don't know exactly what it can be used for. We have certain things that are, quote, relatively safe, and certain things that are, the risk goes up. And one of the things about the bill that was relatively safe is it said the money can be used for water, sewer, and broadband. So that gave us a pretty good hint that we don't know exactly what they mean by the word water or sewer or broadband, but those are the safer areas, because they were really mentioned specifically. So what the House said is, okay, we're going to take $100 million of this money and put it in the Clean Water Fund. And in exchange, they're going to pull out basically the 6% of the rooms and meals tax that goes into clean water for 5 years. So that sort of says we're pulling out 60 million, we're giving them 100 million. And when they talk to the clean water folk and and I wish Commissioner Walk was still on, but the thinking is one of the issues they've run into in clean water is not knowing in advance how much money they're going to have. They thought there was a real advantage to saying, we have 100 million today, we're going to have it. We can start building plans. And I think Commissioner Walk's right. You can use this money to set up projects, figure out what projects are, and think about, oh, he's here, great. Think about funding streams. So this was actually a win-win in a way. It gives the budget some capacity over the next 5 years, but it gave more money out of this bill for clean water. And I think that there is additional money coming in in the capital bill on clean water, which Catherine can talk about. I don't know if I wanted to, that's really what the big 100 million number is. And do you want to stop there for a minute and have you ask questions, or have Catherine talk about the capital money, or we can go into other areas?
Senator Bray, may I jump in for a moment? I think the one
Yes,
piece
please.
about the $100 million that we're trying to make sure as you well know, the clean water budget overall comes from lots of different sources and has different strings attached to it. And so we need to make sure that there aren't strings that are going to run afoul by using the ARPA money, if it's federal money to match federal money, and then it becomes an issue. We have a little bit of nervousness about the sort of time-bound nature of that money, but certainly are excited about the increase that would go towards the Clean Water Fund. So we're just trying to work through the details to make sure we haven't missed anything at this point. Everything moving fast.
I have a quick question. So is it unusual for us to say we're going to make this kind of change for 5 years, a lump sum, 100 million in over 5 years? We would have had 60 million in receipts, rooms and meals, et cetera. And we're counting on all those things to play out as forecast right now.
Yeah, so I would say it's not usual. You're correct. And nothing in life, we're in a very unusual time. And, we have we don't have the capacity to raise revenues right now because of, or at least that's what the determination was made in the House. and you may go to a different determination in the Senate. Their concern was in the current situation, they did not want to raise revenues. The administration was not favorable about raising revenues. And so there were some needs that were some things identified in the budget that the House wanted to add beyond what the governor funded. And so this was a way to give them capacity over 5 years to have a little bit more money on the bottom line. Now, there's risk. And, I think we even, as Commissioner Walk points out, we don't really know the clean water final words. We think this is a relatively good deal. There'll be some bugs. We could not do this, in which case then we just cut 10 million from the budget and we, clean water wouldn't take it. But this is pushing the envelope a little bit. I think that we're going to talk a little bit more about other uses and how there are a lot of things the House did that move into a grayer areas, but this is a lot less gray than totally gray.
Okay. All right. Any committee questions before we move ahead on the rest of the big picture?
I would just say that when we get past the water piece, they did in the House budget take out the weatherization money, 20 million of it, and they swapped it out with our funds. So I did ask Steve to mention that to the committee today too, because as we move ahead with 109 that we sent over, we're going to want to make sure that all of that money, we can do the same thing that Commissioner Walk just talked about. What I would say to Commissioner Walk is, this is, however we come out on this money is fine. The place I really want to be ready is next summer or fall when Congress comes out with an infrastructure bill. We need to be ready.
You want to have Catherine go over the capital bill first, and then we'll move to weatherization?
Yep.
I think I see Senator McDonald had a question.
Senator Westman has brought up the subject that I think we do not wish to spend money that's available for stimulus and to be moving our economy quickly on things that might be funded by an upcoming infrastructure bill. And that's, of course, you can't count your chickens before they've been hatched. But if we should be thinking about how we put money to work, a way to put people to work, and how we might be shovel ready for the any infrastructure stuff that comes along. And that's a, I don't know how you predict that, but we should have it in mind when we're picking what we're going to buy now, to purchase or spend it now. So we don't, spend one anyway, just because it makes sense to plan ahead. That was much more long-winded than I intended. So.
Okay. Well, it's April 1st. That's the nature of today, I guess. Any other questions, comments before Mr. Klein goes on? Okay, thanks.
Well, actually, I would turn to Catherine just to cover the capital bill first, and then we'll go to weatherization.
Sure. I'm Catherine Benham with the Joint Fiscal Office, and the capital bill also has water and sewer projects in it. And what the House chose to do was they funded their projects with capital funds. But at the end of the bill, they put in some reserve language where they allow the Commissioner of Finance and Management to use $15 million a year for a total of 30 over the 2 years of the capital bill towards projects that would be eligible. So it's not, because the rules are unclear, and we came up with somewhere between $10 to $15 million in the capital bill that could potentially be eligible depending on how the regulations come out. So that gives the Commissioner of Finance and Management some flexibility to do a total of 30 million over the 2 years for capital bill water and sewer projects.
Okay. And is that beyond a normal fund? There must be some steady, I don't know. I'm guessing that there's steady funding for those kinds of projects anyway. So this is in addition, or
No,
that's the
this,
total?
that would be the standard, sort of the standard. That was what they were going to fund it with anyway, with capital funds. So
Yep.
if it, it could potentially free up to $15 million in capital funds next year. There's clearly some regulations, like you can't use federal money to match some of the federal grants. So there's going to be those kinds of issues to make sure work through. Commissioner Walker's talking about that. You have to be careful about the regulations, but it potentially is going to free up some capital funds in the next 2 years to be used for other capital projects.
Okay. All right. Anything more on capital bill? Okay. So I guess we are back to the update on
Yeah.
weatherization fund swap.
Okay, good. And so the concept here is that, and I think it's a lot what the committee is saying. There's a lot we don't know, and our goal is to sort of use this money to get it out there as quick as we can for major problems and use it as creatively as we can to address them. Clean water being one, broadband being another, and weatherization is clearly up there in the list. And to the extent that we can do it, but the one thing I want to make sure, this money is 3.5-year money, so it goes until December 2024. So not all decisions have to be made right now. And I think the focus right now is what can we get out today that can put us in a stronger position, so that when we'll talk in January and February, you can make sort of secondary decisions that can allocate money more effectively. So what you'll see is they used ARPA money for weatherization, and there is language in the ARPA bill, and it's a little less direct, unlike the money that was spent for clean water, which is according to, it says can be used for, water, sewer, and broadband. There's this less perfect language that allows the money to be used to respond to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19, or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. So the thinking here is, how broad can we interpret that? And that's where you get into we're getting into grayer tones right now. So that they said, we'll put $20 million of weatherization money into this bill. And we also have language in the event that it's found to be ineligible. We left 38 million in the bottom line for FY22, so that general fund, so we can substitute money in and out to help make balance things. We also think what'll happen, like the CRF money, a lot of this money can probably be put in places that we're eligible. We can harvest general fund and cover our needs. So we don't know. There was sort of a say, let's take a calculated risk. Let's put money out for weatherization, cover this, and hope that it works. And, my hope is between now and January, you will know pretty much what you can do with this money and what you can't. And I would think that you would want to reserve, and the House did some language in the budget that says they're reserving it for a number of big things. You may want to reserve it, if it's eligible, a big chunk of this money for things like weatherization, because that is a really important issue. The other thing you all have talked about is there's this other bill, the new federal infrastructure bill, which the general thinking is it's probably 6 months from happening, but it will happen while you're gone. So that's it's being developed right now by the president. Then it's got to go to the House, Senate, and the question is, unless they can get enough votes to over 60%, they have to wait till they have room to do it through reconciliation. And so there's a lot of unclarity about that. That's something we'll find out. But then the other thing that's going on right now, and you also alluded to, is the budget development process for this coming year. Right, as I understand it, Congressman Welch is asking for earmark type ideas right now. Then Leahy is going to be doing it later, because the House is on a timeline of hopefully having the budget out for FY22 by the end of June. And then the Senate comes in, does the budget, and then they pass that by September sometime, or ideally. It hasn't happened on time for a number of years. So there is sort of three things happening here. One is the money we have today, and we know it's targeted toward, water, sewer, and broadband. The money that the potential for earmarks, which is being offered and thought of by the congressional folk. And the third is this infrastructure bill, which is likely to have more for broadband, more for water, sewer, and probably weatherization, energy-related projects. So you do have a lot coming up. And I think the point you're making about, and I think the commissioner made, is this 100 million goes right now most likely can be used to sketch out and to figure out projects and do initial work. So as the Clean Water Board figures out what to do with the money, they may be able to use this to sort of create projects, essentially to create sort of project ideas. So it may not all go out right away this is where I'm over my head. So the commissioner can jump in, but I think there's the goal of actually doing projects, but there's also the goal of understanding what can be done.
Okay.
So what you're saying is the money we've got right now, you think could be used to get us shovel ready?
I'm hopeful, and I would ask if the commissioner doesn't. I mean, I think that's what you indicated. It could be the case, but I don't want to overstep my role here in knowledge. I don't know if you want to jump in.
I think it's an open question. One of the things that we often struggle with is the distinction between, we need to continue to, there's going to be projects that don't get funded through any of these monies. And so we need to continue to have a pipeline for those projects. And so having design work be completed so that when a community is ready to move forward in the future using existing funding, then we want to move that along too. It's a question of eligibility for different pots. And we can probably do some creativity to move some things around between the SRFs and ARPA money to free up more SRF capacity for the design work. That's an option that might be out there in terms of helping those projects all projects move along. It is, but it's a lot of hypothetical situations at this point, not knowing precisely what.
Yeah, and I would say, so one of the things you might want to think about if you on the weatherization front is they've taken this $20 million gray area risk. There is a pretty good potential that you will be able to find a way to use more of this money for weatherization, or you will have money for weatherization in the new bill. And so the question is, when the budget comes through, or do you recommend to the Senate Appropriations Committee that they reserve some of this ARPA money for January, February, March, just like the House proposed reserving it for energy-related projects like weatherization to help? And to the extent that you do that, I think you should use the language that says to deal with the negative impacts of households, and because that's the in that we have right now. And as the regulations come up, you may find out that nothing's eligible, in which case what you reserved won't be done. But you're basically putting a stamp on it, and it's something that they did you're saying that you would like to make sure that in the planning for next budget year that they put that in the list of things that they're reserving money to do. So that would be one thing to do. The other thing that's going on, and I think your committee was involved in this a little bit, there's concern about trained people to do weatherization and just how much capacity we have in the system. And one of the things that the House, I think, did, and I was going to check this, is they put 20.5 million into a variety of training programs for people. And I don't know, but I think they might have included the training weatherized folk at VTC. But you may want to check that. And that would be another thing to push for, is to say, in the event that, because you're trying to, I think that the point your committee's made pretty clearly is that we need to be ready for this stuff to happen. And so what are the sort of human resource pieces that you want to get in place, so if the money comes in, you can actually utilize it? So that, I would say, that might be something else to bring up to the budget folk, is to make sure that training is funded and that you're creating that capacity.
Okay. So we have roughly $35 million in our weatherization bill, and of that, it includes, as you're saying, there's a workforce piece, there's a counseling and outreach piece, there's a funding and funding. Those are the three main legs on the stool. And it's, the way we've been framing it up, working with approps, is that it's one-time money to be expended over 2+ years. And that syncs us up with the cycles for Efficiency Vermont and stuff like that, some of our major actors. So we create a energy savings fund. all our money goes to that and then is allocated out of it. And the idea was that we wanted to basically build a fence around that money so that somehow it doesn't get swept and we don't have year two's worth of that money, since it's one time but 2-year spend. Now, we also talked about if we can flow federal dollars in to do some of that work, that we are using state, I don't know if we call them surplus dollars or what, the 213 that we identified 3 months ago. If we can flow federal dollars in and free those up, you know, this is our committee's sort of selfish perspective, I suppose. We're hoping that they still stay in that energy savings fund, because that means capacity that bridges into year 3, you know, that kind of thing. And I don't know to what degree these swaps mean. We're not letting you hold on to the surplus money you had. You're going to surrender that, and we're going to backfill with ARPA money. So I guess there's some, and a reserve sounds like a way to deal, like if it's truly a swap and we're giving up those state quote unquote surplus dollars, then the reserve sounds like a way, well, if the ARPA money does not pan out, then you have a way to backfill and restore us to where we think we are right now. So it does seem like a little bit of a tricky thing to navigate. Senator Westman, then Senator McCormick.
So one other, well, I got a couple of other pieces. So part of the question is if they did the swap out for weatherization. We also had 2 electrical pieces. They had community solar, and back off from that, when you talk about infrastructure and the federal bill, have they said anything about electrical grid? And so, for example, the infrastructure bill that might be passed 6 months from now, has there been any discussion about, as we talk about infrastructure, that the electrical grid might be included in that? So when we get people coming in talking about, for example, battery storage, would anything, have they been discussing that at all? So I had 2 questions. One, could we swap out for the present era money our community solar? And 2, are there discussions in that federal infrastructure bill that would allow us to address deficiencies within our electrical infrastructure grid?
So I would just say, I don't know. I haven't had a chance to review the infrastructure bill as of yet. So maybe Commissioner Walker, I don't know if you have any knowledge about that. Do you know offhand?
I have only briefly scanned the list of things in the infrastructure bill, and it is pretty exhaustive, but I don't know specifically any more detail other than sort of what the headlines have been at this point.
I just want to respond a little bit to Senator Bray's question, which is just to give you my sort of anxiety. We're in a funny situation right now because we got the ARPA money, we had the CRF money, then we get the ARPA money, which is $1 billion. Then we're going to get theoretically this infrastructure money, which could easily be another $1 billion. And then there's talk about a whole human service bill that might come along too, which since we put so much in Vermont into that area, that could help us tremendously. So we're in a period of relative, I don't want to say riches, but yeah, we have a good period right now financially. The big problem is that 2 things are happening. One is at some point this federal money will diminish and we won't be able to rely on it. So we have to be very careful about building long-term obligations. And the second issue is that the fact that we're getting all this federal money comes in has really strengthened our economy, and it's affected our general fund and our education fund, and even probably lesser extent the T fund. But we're seeing an impact on our revenues coming in very strong also. So just as we're going to lose the federal money at some point, when this sort of tremendous period of federal largesse, which could last 2 or 3 or 4 years, ends, there's going to be And then just like we do the clean water bill, we'll have to lose that money back to the clean water fund. There is going to be a period of time where we're going to have to adjust to the change, to the lack of this tremendous resource and its impact on the general fund and the education fund. So one of the things that's going on is not only are we reserving money now for the for in case we're wrong on the ARPA and we need to cover that, we also are talking about, do we need to build our reserves overall in the state up to a much higher level? Because the transition, you know, when you get used to having so much money, the transition off of that is going to be potentially painful. So it's another concept. And so what we're trying to do with one of the things you'll see in the budget, and you all have to think about is, and you've already started talking about this, is using this money to do things that can be spent now and not building, you know, take advantage of it today, get things spent, but not create long tails. And so you might want to, I think, Senator Bray, your point about a lot of what was in your bill, if you can get them to spend money today on the workforce aspects, we think that's very eligible for expenditures. One of the things we're seeing with the COVID-19 is we have a major unemployment issue. We have a lot of changing people that are no longer going to be able to go back to the jobs they have. There's been changes in the economy, more remote and less bricks and mortar. And, you know, so to the extent that we're training people for new professions or different professions, it's pretty easy to defend. So I would say using that money in that way and getting that paid for the federal funds is a pretty, I would say the grayness is way less. So yeah, taking chunks of your bill and putting it into the ARPA do make sense.
Okay, well, great. Thanks. I'm also glad to hear, I hadn't heard yet about building a reserve, because I do feel like chickens will be coming home to roost down the road, and we better be ready. Senator McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 questions, and I wish I had asked them yesterday when we got dismaying testimony that we once had the workforce for weatherization and that we neglected it and that we now are short. I guess I'm wondering, and I'm not sure who I'm asking here, how far short are we? And how long do we imagine it'll take to catch up? And have we already accounted for that? Not necessarily where the money's coming from, but accounted for what it's going to cost. And I may be asking the rest of the committee who pay closer attention.
Some of it, I think on the amount of work, and I can't say precisely how this correlates with the size of the workforce to do it, but we've talked about doubling the amount of work done in the next, and then doubling again, and over roughly a 5 to 6 year period. And how many people that means, I don't think I've heard the translation yet, so it's a good question.
Yeah. But I mean, have we already, we've already asked for that money. That's already in our bill, right?
Yes, it's actually part of the 16 million that was originally spoken of as just going to be HFA. Well, that was really an umbrella term for money for incentives, money for workforce, and money for counseling / outreach.
Yeah.
So now they've broken those pieces into 3 pieces, because it's 3 things, and VHFA is not directly taking on, for instance, the workforce piece. They're partnering with others who are already doing that work, like Efficiency Vermont, VTC.
So,
That's the idea I wanted.
Senator Westman.
So we can put a fence around any of this ARPA money at least until 24. So for the next 3 years.
Yeah, I think that the question would be, you might want to put a fence around it to at least to cover through you might want to put a fence around the money for until we come back in session next session, because we're going to know a lot more about what it can be used for. And
But theoretically, if we thought for a for like sewage treatment plant or that, we theoretically could put a fence around that money for 3 years.
you have the money for 3.5 years, and it can be spent in that period of time, so you can put your fence around it, sort of.
Yeah. And if we find out that next January the weatherization is a go, we could put a fence around that money for 3 years.
Yes, and people are putting a lot of fences around this range, and so the only question is, you might want to put a preliminary fence now to say you want to hold it until so you're building your, and the governor is going to release next week his proposed fences. He's going to say, here's how I'd like to see the money allocated.
Yeah.
And as you know, the House put a fence around 650 million. So I think that, you have this great, wonderful field, and there's gonna be a lot of fences, and that'll be a great thing to discuss.
Well, and what I would say to the chair is, we may decide that for weatherization, the governor spent 20 million because that's what we had for surplus money.
Mm-hmm.
We might want to ask for a little more.
Yep.
We
Mr.
might want,
Chair?
and we can put a fence around that for 3 years.
Senator McDonald?
I was chasing cows yesterday. The fence that I had around them failed. Fences are like dams. Water runs downhill and all dams fail sooner or later. So to get off the metaphors, I can't imagine having a 2.5 years worth of money sitting around, and this legislature or any legislature that's going to be adjourning, 14 months from now, if we keep to our schedule, a year from May, leaving any of that money unspent. And were we to do that, someone else would be, I can't imagine that happening, or unallocated. So
I'm not suggesting it be unallocated. I'm suggesting we can put a fence around it and have it allocated for weatherization going out 3 years if we find it.
we could allocate it.
Yep.
And then another legislature could reallocate what was.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
you
okay. So
we could fight over it.
Yeah. And if we go home, then, and we haven't made decisions, then maybe, the Joint Fiscal Committee will be authorized to make decisions on our behalf, based, on the governor's recommendations. And if we don't authorize them to do that, then the governor will be in the difficult position of having to find ways to spend that money at his or her discretion, without our guidance.
My worry is if we don't put a stake in the ground, we lose.
Yeah, I would say, just to emphasize what Senator Westman's saying, I think when the governor puts his proposal out next week of where he wants the fences, to use the analogy, and the House did theirs already, I think by the time we get out of here, in the appropriations bill, there probably will be a set of priorities for that money. And they won't be spending it now. They'll just say, coming back in January, February, March, when we have the guidance, this is the general set of prioritization. So to the extent that you're placing one in that table, it's a totally legitimate thing to do.
That makes sense, and I think that's what Senator Westman was sketching out. To switch to broadband, if you spent money this year to make ready and examine where all the places were to start constructing next spring building season, that would be a prudent thing to do.
Yeah, and the House added 150 million to the broadband.
Yeah, so we've been dealing with water and things of that nature, not broadband here.
Before going to,
Okay, this year's money is going to be treated by the various players, legislators, and administration in a much less collegial fashion than last year's money, just because all the parties have had a little practice last year and are revising how they could better exercise their prerogatives. So.
Before going to Senator, thanks, Senator McDonald. Well, I wanted to follow up on the fencing thing, not to stick with it too long, but our bill does that quite formally in the form of creating the energy savings fund and allocating to it. So it's I think our hope is that gives us a steadiness and is a harder fence to breach because the money will already be allocated. The question I wanted to ask Mr. Klein was, and I sent Stephanie Bear a note on this, and I've talked to when I was in a probes about this. If all that we allocate all 35 in the bill, actually it's not all. We say we do. So all the money goes to this fund, energy savings fund. It's actually held at the department. It's a public service allocated out from there. They pass money through. What are the options for this committee and this legislature after the bill is passed to have some voice and control over those allocations? You know, we don't want it to be that we put money in the bank and then the bank just decides how to spend it thereafter. Because there'll be changing priorities. We'll learn more about ARPA. We'll learn more about the infrastructure bill. So we might want to reallocate, but how do we do that once we've moved money out to an executive department?
So I'm probably not ideally suited because I don't really know your bill as well as I should. And so I would just say that where you hit on is, and also I'm a budget person, so I don't like walls and fences. I like fences to be low enough that I can jump over them if I have to, which is a problem. I think that we're in a very unusual time. And as you pointed out earlier, that there is money coming in the ARPA, there's money coming into the infrastructure, and they're all affecting the areas that you're talking about, creating in that bill. And so my thinking is this is probably a bad time to sort of really put firm, honest fences around that in the bill that you have, just because there's so much other stuff happening that you're going to, and we tell this and I would get in trouble everywhere because in childcare and all these areas, everybody's putting this thing like, I want to set up a plan today when and there's so much changing in these areas right now that you're in the middle of an very unusual period of resource availability.
Okay. Well, I think part of it comes back to, and I'll turn to Senator McCormick, who's patiently waiting. Maybe this is a future conversation. Once we adjourn, I'd like to know how we preserve the legislature's prerogative and to weigh in on appropriations. I don't actually fully understand how it is that we seem to be in a more passive position, sort of a take it or leave it at joint fiscal committee position, as opposed to we're leading the discussion. Since we're the appropriators, I don't know how we suddenly don't seem to have that leading role anymore once we adjourn. But Senator McCormick, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think rather than a fence, what we're wishing we had is something analogous to a safe deposit box to which we lose the key. To put the money in there and then you can't touch it. And I don't think anything like that actually exists. I think a fence is as good as it gets. When you earmark the money, when you identify it for a particular fund, the fund can still be rated, But I think there's generally a reluctance to do that. And if you do raid the fund, you've committed yourself to put it back at some point. And you hear complaints about raiding the transportation fund and so on. Is that you're supposed to put it back. So at least the money is as protected as we can make it. I guess that's, so I think a fund, and we identified that that's where the money goes and that's how it's supposed to be used, is probably as secure as we can make it.
And public shaming. Okay, Senator Westman.
I would just say, if we don't put a stake in the ground, and how we put a stake in the ground, we won't, somebody will have put their stake in the ground to take this. And we have a number of areas that we know: weatherization, sewage treatment plants. We've heard problems about the electrical grid that we know that, but we need to be able to articulate a case for those things that we know are infrastructure related, with long-term, will make this a better place. And we need to be able to articulate and make the case for the things that we think we can do. One of the questions I have about weatherization is 20 million, where I think that number was constrained by the budget at the time it was put together. So I think for us, we need to rethink what we've done and be not afraid to say, here are the things that we think are important. And I think clearly we've learned over a period of time that sewage treatment plants here are inadequate. We haven't put money into that area. And this is an opportunity to get off our duff and move.
I just know I've got to leave the meeting now, but Catherine can stay and, answer questions. And I think your discussion is a valid discussion. So but I appreciate being part of it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming in.
Okay.
And I can see we're going to talk at least once more before we adjourn.
Okay.
If I might, I've also,
Yep.
Senator Westman was asking about what the infrastructure bill, what the president's infrastructure bill is proposing, and I found a fact sheet on it, which actually speaks to one of the pieces is the electric grid. I could send this to your committee assistant if you want, who could then share it with you, if that would be helpful.
Sure, great.
Obviously, it's not a bill yet. It's president's proposal. So,
right. Thank you. All right. So it's been very helpful we don't have clear answers, but we have a better idea of the challenge in terms of working through. And Senator Westman, I like your clarity about boiling it down to putting a stake in the ground on weatherization, grid upgrade, CSO, and wastewater. We will be paralyzed if we have too many projects. Okay, with that, so we are going to be hearing from Mr. O'Grady's not here yet. So why don't we take a brief break until 10:40 and see if Mr. O'Grady is freed up and made it to committee by then. Senator Campion has a bill S-129, an act relating to the management of fish and wildlife. And we just got it, so we'd like to introduce it. And then when we're done with that, we have some committee discussion time, and then we'll be wrapping a little early today. Thank you, Ms. Benham and Ms. Commissioner Walk. And we